Good.
Well, then I think you're probably ready to go. Pete's
I
the
am.
vice
I'm
chair.
ready to start the meeting.
You're ready to
Meeting is
ready to
now
rock and roll.
Here we go. Heidi, you're up, I guess.
Well, actually, we'll do a roll call.
Oh, yes. So we have Leonard, myself, Connie, Bill, Denise. So 5 out of 9.
5 out of 9.
Brett, were you intending to give a little introduction and our decision on the SDCs? And
Yeah, yeah, thank you for that. I did send out an email earlier today regarding the SDC and the approach to that. We had originally intended to take on include the SDC component with the master plan updates. And after we started looking through things and talking it through, is like it made more sense to put that off until with the urban renewal plan that's going on. The TSP did a similar thing with that, is holding off on the SDCs until we work through that piece of it, and then we'll come back and revisit that. So in the agenda packet had the technical memo that included that SDC methodology. So we will be revising that and taking that out, that piece of it. So Heidi's presentation, what she'll have tonight, is modified from what was in the packet as far as the PDF with that. So
Okay.
Heidi, then
Yep, anytime you're ready, Heidi.
Okay, thank you all for joining us tonight. Let me share my screen. Everyone see the slideshow? Okay. So because we won't be talking about the system development charge component, we're just going to focus on the capital improvement projects tonight. Very brief agenda, so a little bit of review from the first CAC meeting, since it's been a little while, just the context of how we got here very briefly, and then the update to the water system capital improvement program that we are recommending. So back to the goals for this project. This was initially motivated by wanting to make sure that improvements needed to serve the riverfront area were captured in the water master plan. And since that area had not completed its concept plan when we did the 2017 water master plan, we hadn't really made any consideration for future development there. So that was a key driver for this project. Meanwhile, the House Bill 2001 middle housing measure was passed in 2019. And so the city had some work to do there in looking at your zoning codes, and they asked us to do some additional analysis to determine if increasing density in an area north of the riverfront and south of downtown, as well as another area north of downtown, would impact water facilities. There was some impact from that, primarily related to providing fire flow for increased density. There's a higher fire flow requirement for that. And then you're also working on your seismic resilience assessment for your water utility. That's now a requirement of water master plans in the state of Oregon as of 2018. So this was an opportunity to incorporate those projects in your capital improvement program as well. Then the intention was to take that updated improvement program and look at your system development charges. But as Brett let you know earlier, the city has decided to revisit that after there was some desire from council to have some conversations, and also the urban renewal program is being developed as well. So those were two of the reasons I understood for delaying that update. Have more feedback. So our analysis process for updating the water master plan, particularly for the riverfront area, kind of had three major components. So the first one was, excuse me, water demand. And the question is just, has water demand changed since 2017? And what does that then mean based on the criteria we've established for how much capacity you need in the water system? And the criteria was also reviewed. We did not make any changes from what was in the 2017 plan. This was a snapshot from our last presentation of the fire flow analysis results. So the red circles are showing you places where there are deficiencies in fire flow for that middle housing higher density that's in the purple area, and then as well as the yellow hatched area, which is the riverfront. But since there are no existing pipes there, you're really planning for future development rather than assessing existing fire flow. Which brings us to improvements. So start with the riverfront improvements. And I believe that you all received the full text of the memo report that had a map showing these improvements. It was figure 2 at the end of the report. And then Doug very wisely brought to our attention that the road alignment should really have this particular pipe. Can you see my cursor? Right where College Street and 14th meet. Is it Northeast Waterfront or 14th, Doug? Do those two roads kind of share a name? I didn't quite.
Past College Street, it's Northeast Waterfront.
Okay, that makes sense. So right in this area, we had the pipe alignment in the memo that you received as advance for this meeting, going down the slope and into the greenway area. And instead, it will now be running through the road alignment there. That also meant that a small piping improvement was needed along College between the existing Weatherly Way, which is a relatively new street and pipe, down to that alignment on 14th. But all in all, it ended up being less pipe and a little bit more 8-inch pipe and less 12-inch. So it was a reduction in cost overall from what you have in your memos of about $100,000. Any questions about riverfront improvements? So these were selected to meet the city's engineering criteria. So we looked at ductile iron pipe, minimum pipe sizes of 8 inches, residential fire flows of 1,000 to 1,500 gallons per minute, and more commercial and industrial fire flows over here on the former West Rock Mill site of 3,000 gallons per minute. And those are consistent with the Oregon State Fire Code as well.
And Heidi, with that,
Yeah.
it loops the system. I think that's a big part of the fire flow is being able to loop that system.
Yes, that's actually a large reason for RMP 8 and RMP 2 and RMP 1 being 12-inch pipes, is they're really providing a backbone system for this area. So, it's likely that you may have some other smaller roads as this area develops, and this will provide a large diameter pipe to, get the water to the area, so then you can build out, smaller streets and cul-de-sacs with smaller pipe sizes as development warrants.
And I think one thing I would add, Heidi, that little piece of 8-inch pipe in College Street, because you can see the blue lines behind it or adjacent to it. So for everybody to know, those are actually 1-inch or 2-inch lines as part of an extraterritorial extension that the city did decades ago to serve those homes. So even though you see a blue line, it does not meet current city standards for being an 8-inch line.
Yes, and just industry-wide, we would generally consider something like a 1-inch line to basically be a service line just for a single home, maybe 2 homes. So we're making the assumption also that as this new pipe is installed, those services that long pipe would be abandoned and a shorter service line connecting those existing homes would be moved to the new pipe. Thank you, Doug. Appreciate the clarification. Oh, did I skip a slide? I did skip a slide. I'm so sorry. So going back to the middle housing improvements, so the city asked us to look at 2 areas. One was north of downtown, and there was one very small pipe extension to a fire hydrant that was undersized recommendation we made there. So I'm not showing that on the map. But in the area south of downtown, which is the purple shading on this map, so adjacent to the riverfront area, several piping improvements are needed to serve middle housing with, we estimate a 2,000 gallon per minute fire flow. So that would be a duplex, triplex, fourplex, court apartments, I think all of you are familiar with middle housing from our previous discussion. So the really critical thing here is that the existing piping grid is 4 inches and 6-inch pipe. And for a lot of the existing homes in this area, that's sufficient because they are single family homes. They have a lower fire flow requirement. So it's not that there's deficiency here now, but if you do want to build in more density to this area, it's going to be not possible with the existing piping grid to meet those fire flow requirements. And this is also a good opportunity to connect your larger diameter pipes that will be going in with the riverfront improvements will help provide connectivity from your existing water treatment plant on the Willamette through the riverfront area and now up through this area into downtown. So it's going to building more resilience into your whole system in terms of having better availability of water for fire protection. We did try to focus the larger pipes on College Street and River Street because we know that you're going to be doing some road improvements there as part of the riverfront master plan. Okay, I will move on to seismic improvements. The seismic resilience study was one that was done in parallel to our work on the water master plan update. Have you had citizen advisory committee meetings about this, Brett? I don't know if they've already kind of heard. Okay. I touched on this briefly in our last meeting. We did not do this particular analysis, but I have done similar work in other jurisdictions. And so this is in response to the Oregon Resilience Plan that was published in 2013, looking at what is the response and recovery rate of utilities and transportation networks to the Cascadia subduction zone 9.0 magnitude earthquake that research now tells us will likely occur sometime potentially in the next 50 years. So the goal of a seismic resilience evaluation now is to look at what is the geologic hazard situation in your particular city. Because whether or not you're sitting on something like liquefiable clay or more of the basalt of Parrot Mountain is really relevant to how your buried facilities might fare in that kind of event. So generally a seismic hazard analysis is done and then overlay that with the mapping of your water system to determine what water facilities are at risk. And also, recognizing which water facilities are truly critical, meaning your supply, often your finished water storage tanks, because that's a place where you can keep clean and treated water and either take it out to people or bring people to it. If there are pipe breaks in the system that are not allowing water to flow out to customers, which is the expectation in this event. So the improvements that were identified from that seismic resilience work were retrofits to your existing water treatment plant, emergency connections and controls at the water treatment plant that will allow operators to make, I believe, both remote and emergency actions to isolate the water treatment plant during an earthquake so that it is not further damaged and the water that's there doesn't flow out of broken pipes onto the ground. Improvements to the North Valley reservoirs, hydraulic control valves for a similar reason. That's something that you want to shut down when the earthquake happens so that you're keeping water in your tanks rather than letting it flow out through broken pipes in the system. Then pipe replacement, so looking at those pipes that are most vulnerable due to their material. So a lot of cast iron pipe was installed in Western Oregon in the 1960s and 1970s. We now use ductile iron, which is not a more flexible material, but a less brittle material. So cast iron pipe, we're finding when pipe breaks happen in that vintage of pipe, there'll be a longitudinal crack down the length of the pipe rather than a break in a single point. So there's a weakness in the material that's exacerbated if you have corrosive soil. I'm not aware if that's an issue in Newburgh. So those are some of the materials that we focus on when we're talking about seismic because they are more vulnerable to failure. Concrete pipe would also be included in that. Essentially, if you want something to move with the ground, then if it behaves more like a hose and less like a pipe with stiff joints, then it's more likely to survive in a seismic event. And they also, the seismic resilience plan engineers recommended some additional studies. One of them was to develop new engineering standards for the city. So looking at those things like pipe materials, should we be restraining the joints on our pipes so that they hold together better and have more flexibility in a seismic event? Additional geotechnical investigations to define your geohazards. I believe that was at the water treatment plant. As well as structural recommendations for the treatment plant and other city facilities. So some of these recommendations may seem a little general, but what we are finding is that when you are ready to retrofit a tank or a treatment plant, whatever you know you need to do for a seismic retrofitting, you need to do a structural analysis anyway. So doing a higher level analysis, and spending the money but not getting the full answer early on doesn't necessarily provide value. So it's good to know kind of when this will fit in your capital improvement budget and come back and look at doing more detailed analysis when you're ready to do the retrofitting. So I think that's kind of what some of these additional studies are aimed at. And then evaluating what sort of seismic hazard mitigation can be done for your raw water pipeline that goes across the old Highway 219 bridge by the treatment plant. So all of those seismic improvements come to $11.9 million. It is a large price tag. The difference with a seismic CIP is that it can be stretched over 50 years rather than the 20 that we generally look at, but that's really also a risk and policy decision that I'm sure the city will be working through.
I have one question. You didn't have anything on the well field. How
Yes.
does well casing that we use hold up in a seismic event?
Actually, wells are the most survivable supplies in a seismic event versus, dams can be vulnerable to breaking, even your sedimentation basins and that sort of thing at a water treatment plant. But wells do better. It's not my area of expertise, I will say. And the city has also taken steps, I understand, in your last one or two well house designs to accommodate flooding, which is the other issue that you could encounter as part of this with, material sloughing off into the Willamette. So there was no specific recommendation in the seismic resilience plan that I saw. I don't know if that's being handled separately under your supply planning. Brad, or
Yeah,
did I see Karen?
It would fall within the additional studies and recommendations there, piece for the other city facilities that are listed there in that.
The other thing I will add is based on the 2018 master plan, we had looked at the need for a redundant water supply because the well field is our only source. If something was to happen to the well field, we don't have really any other options. So we have been actively looking at and working with the council and others looking for a redundant supply source. So that effort is already underway, not necessarily just for the seismic event, but for if anything happened to the well field for whatever reason, giving us another option moving forward. So that, like I said, that is actively, we're working that. The council has given us direction and through phase 2. So we're now moving into phase 3 of that evaluation, including preliminary engineering.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Not hearing any. I guess we're at the stage here. We're ready to make the ask of the committee to ask that you make a recommendation, or that the committee makes a recommendation that for the city council to adopt the 2017 Water Master Plan Addendum, Riverfront Master Plan, or is what we're going to be calling this, utilizing the Water Master Plan Update Technical Memorandum and included in the packet that Murray Smith has put together as revised to remove the STC methodology and include that as an appendix in the 2017 Water Master Plan.
Before we start on, is there any, well, Mike is here now, so there's 6. And you'd make a note of that. Heidi, thank you very much for your presentation. Any questions or discussion that, I mean, we didn't have any during but now we're being asked to make a recommendation. And one of us would have to make a motion. Or is it motion being made by the city?
We're asking that the committee make a motion to make the recommendation.
To accept the 2017 master plan. Is there someone that would like to do that, or would you like to discuss it?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
The only caveat I put on it is when we buy the redundant water supply, let's learn from Flint, Michigan to make sure that our pipes can handle the Willamette water. That's the obvious place for redundant water.
Definitely.
I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed? It is passed unanimously. We move on to old business.
I will bow out gracefully. Thank you all so much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Heidi.
Thanks, Heidi.
Thank you.
So now this is the opportunity to really continue discussion on the stormwater policy that you'd started with the last meeting we had on the 21st and continuing. This is a time for the committee to talk through the items that you had been asking for to be on the agenda and to continue that discussion. And I'll just point out that this is for recommendations, and you made 2 recommendations at the last meeting that we had on the 21st. So if you have through your discussion, you come up with recommendations you'd like to have put into the master plan. The consultant is working on an update that has the location within that plan for those recommendations to go into. So
Would you reiterate the 2 recommendations that we made, Brett?
yeah, in general terms, the first one was to allow the rain gardens within the public utility easements, and for the city to look at developing standards to allow for those facilities to be there, minimizing impacts to the utilities. The second one is to look at increased use of impervious surfaces.
Also, I just wrote a letter and you kindly sent it out today, and I have about 7 specific recommendations that I would like to see incorporated into the stormwater master plan update.
This is the opportunity for the committee to discuss those. Any additional recommendations?
Has everyone seen that email? It's the latest one from Brett.
It was earlier
I
today.
saw it, but it was long enough that I didn't get it all digested in the last few hours.
Would you want to walk us through that, Leonard?
Sure.
Let's just take it point by point.
I'm just going to print out a copy real quick so I can look at the screen. Well, printer doesn't want to print unless I put paper in it. Can you imagine doing that? Basically, I'm making my recommendations. I started my engineering career. I remember the first project I did was in McMinnville, and I had gotten a book from the American Society of Civil Engineers on using grass swales and things like that. And so one of my first engineering projects, we did it in McMinnville without curbs. And it worked successfully, except the bank said, we don't want to loan money on lots that don't have streets with curbs. So that idea went down the tube.
I do have your letter in front of me, Leonard. Would you like me to go through it?
I'm sure. Well, yeah,
And I'm going to start with the recommendations that you have here.
yeah, that's what I was
Okay.
going to go over.
It's recommended that the city adopts the design standards of low impact development in Western Oregon, a practical guide for watershed health as stated in the standards of the DEQ, the OEC, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Oregon Department of Fish. Or what is ODEF stand for?
Oregon Department of Forestry.
Yeah, okay. Endorse the recommendations included in this template. Encourage local governments to prepare manuals based on the template. DEQ, OEC, UFS, and ODF do not support the use of techniques that are inconsistent with the recommendations in the template.
Right, so those standards were adopted basically as a template for cities to include. And I look at what the city is doing currently, and you know, Habitat for Humanity was an example because I normally do all this stuff and they have a volunteer go out and build a rain garden. And they spend about one Saturday morning on digging the hole and planting the plants. And my partner, Jackie, usually supervises that, and that's worked quite well. I talked Habitat into doing pavers on the driveways probably 8 or 10 years ago, and they've done pavers on all their projects, and that's worked quite well. Well, it came on Habitat 5th Street, and I did the same normal design, and then the city said, geez, you can't do that because they're a public utility easement. And I said, there is no public utility easement. This is a plat of Edwards edition. I think it dates from the 1890s or 1910s. I can't really tell because there's no, plats didn't have dates or signatures on them back in that period of time. So I was a little frustrated with Rick, and I says, look, you gotta just tell the city there's no easement. Well, and I said, I just don't want to go through that. I don't want to turn this into a complicated issue. So he went ahead and talked to the city, and they required an easement. And then they said you can't put water quality facilities in the public utility easement. So then he hired an engineer to design the typical thing that Boca Construction and all these are doing. And it costs like $10,000. And I don't know, the engineer designed two, so it's $20,000, and the engineering fee was $1,350. And it's just getting out of control. You mentioned at the last meeting, everybody should put in a rain garden. Well, if you have to grant an easement to the city, if you want to put in a rain garden and pay $1,350 for an engineer, and then have to do what everybody else is doing and add several $100s to your mortgage payments. I think it was what, a couple $100 that I sent out. We'll never have water quality. So anyway, a lot of the things I've been doing is basically what's in this template, the low impact development in Western Oregon. And I think the city should adopt retaining stormwater inside as a preferred method for handling stormwater. And I do it on all my projects, and you know, there's been no runoff from the habitat restored.
I think,
Connie?
yeah, sorry, if I may. You know, in principle, I think all of the points on this have real merit. I think the language of the recommendations is, to me, perhaps too specific, because clearly, this low impact development in Western Oregon, I haven't read it, so I can't say that that's what the city should use. But certainly, the language of that could be changed, that first one, to say considers instead of adopts. And but if perhaps we go one step backwards and say that that this committee, it seems to me, could have the input of suggesting a way forward in principle and in purpose, and then how the city then, and be very specific about that, is the way that it handles water in general. And then from that, and I don't know if I'm being clear enough, but from that, then a range of options can be explored and considered, including some of these that Leonard's outlined. But that to just go straight to the rules of how the city should do it, it seems to me like we're missing some steps. And as I kind of explained before, I did a fair bit of consulting with towns and with regional economic and environmental development. And until you really understand where you're going, then you're always going to have sort of these argy-bargies. Maybe that's not the right expression, but these argy-bargies about detail. And I might just point out there's a city in South Australia, city of Salisbury, which is one of the driest places in the world. But they have purposefully over the last 20 years set out to become water independent. And many of the things that Leonard's have mentioned, they have been doing for quite some time. So all new development has to have permeable pavement. All groundwater is industry use has to be returned into groundwater and go through a natural cleaning process. So those are just some of the things. But they set out with a particular mission, which was to become water independent and to use water wisely, knowing full well that that as climate change keeps impacting, that's going to be one of the major issues for all communities. So it seems to me that if this committee could recommend that exploring that very specific mission, and I guess you could say the desire for the town to not just do things here and there, but that everything they do comes under this, this umbrella of becoming water independent and the best use of water and for people, for the environment, and for all uses. So it would seem to me, and then we could go and say, all right, well, now consider design standards such as the low impact development, or maybe there are other ones too that might be equally as appropriate for here, and allow for rain gardens. And I would suggest too a way that people can have rainwater tanks and on their properties that would be very useful, given the but then you have to start talking about new housing having a different perhaps type of roofing and things like that. So everything has a flow-on effect, obviously, but if you're very specific about where you're going to head, then it makes it a lot easier to make all the decisions going forward, because they all have to support that particular mission of water independence. So that's just my thought about this. I would not feel comfortable telling the city to adopt a particular design standard on a particular book, unless we all had a lot to say, a lot to learn about that particular.
For me anyway, I double checked my email. I did not receive the document. I'm not going to sign off on a document until I've had a chance to read it. Everything that we propose here is something that comes with a price tag. And the price tag usually goes to either the homeowner that is making the improvements or the developer who is trying to create some sort of a project in town. And so in other words, there's a cost. There has to be some analysis of the benefit. You know, we talked, for instance, about tiles and permeable asphalt. Does everybody understand that those work when the soil is a certain level of permeability? Meaning they don't work if the soil has
They're very
little-
hard to maintain. They plug up. They have all kinds of issues at this point.
they end up having to be replaced. I mean, there are a number of cities that have gone marching towards the altar of permeable asphalt, only to find that it fails much more rapidly than standard asphalt. And so it's constantly having to be replaced. And so you end up with the environmental consequence of having to dispose of asphaltic compounds, which are viewed by California as being carcinogens. So you're double stuck. And the thing is that if I pay to go in and put in pavers, what is the permeability of the soil that I'm putting it on? I've got I'm putting rain gardens in right now off Worth Boulevard and Providence Drive, and you can see them as they're going in. And I've got one that is yet to be planted, but it's still holding 85% of what it got in the last rain. And there's been nothing other done than just an excavation. So we dug a hole and it's full of water. So I'm not, number one, I'm not going to buy off on any plan until I understand the consequences and what those expenses are.
I make comments.
Leonard?
I've found that the rain gardens on the first year, until the vegetation gets established, they will have water. With the habitat restore, it filled up about half full in the first year. And I thought, well, geez.
Leonard, I don't need to interrupt you, but
Yeah.
if I hear any more about the dam restore water retention, I can repeat it constantly. But fact of the matter is, I'm not going to agree to this particular agreement until we understand the full document.
Well, the other, I look at travel. I went to Washington, D.C., and parts of Washington, D.C. still have brick pavers for city streets.
And what is the permeability of the soil under those streets?
Mike, I'm going to have to ask you not to interrupt him. Let him speak, and then you can speak, please.
If you look at my slideshow I did, you test it. You do infiltration testing. It takes about a day to do it. And so you design it based on the permeability rate that you get on testing. When you start testing, it falls. It goes pretty fast at first, and then it slows down. And then after 3 or 4 or 5 hours, it starts to stabilize. So it's based on a testing of the conditions at the site where you're going to put it in. So it's an engineering design, and then you design it based on the same spreadsheets that the city does for the 5, 10, 25, and 50-year storm if you want. So it's designed for all the different storms. So I've done it on several projects, and the city ends up saying, well, you got to have an overflow. Well, we do an overflow, and then it never overflows. So I think, and then the DEQ standards are specifically drawn for Western Oregon. But the problem I really see is there is absolutely zero commitment at the city to head in this direction. We need to send a strong message to the city as we not only want to switch directions, but we want that to be the preferred direction that we go. And the city standards so far only control the rate of discharge of stormwater. They do not control the amount of increased stormwater. And I think we should handle both, and so we can stop and perhaps even eliminate some of the damage that we're doing to our stream corridors.
Okay. Mike?
Oh, I just, like I said, I'd like to read. I'll have to have it resent because I don't have it in any of my inboxes. And I'd like to read it.
Not a problem.
and then we can discuss it. I think the rest of the committee can get in and discuss it. Obviously, I'm very skeptical of the efficacy. See, and part of the reason for this, Leonard, is you. On your recommendation, I put in stormwater management plans in my Oak Meadows 2 subdivision. I put swales in place of the planter strip between the street, or between the curb and the sidewalk. And it worked for about 18 months. And now there's very little different, there's no runoff and run in, or run in and run off from the system anymore. In order to make it happen, I have to get like a mini hoe to come in and remove the fill, the silt that has come into the drain, and the drain lines that I put in order to be able to get it out. And you're also talking to a developer who tried to go to the city and say, can I do splash blocks onto my lawn? I'm told, no, I have to hardline all my storm lines to the city storm in the street. And you designed those. So, you know, we're all fishing with somebody else's bait here. And I would prefer that we stop and understand the total consequences to the people who are putting everything at risk, and not just getting paid fees to design something, but people who are having to pay for those improvements themselves. Hopefully they're going to work, because we did this once before, Leonard. You designed a stormwater detention pond that I paid for off of Worth Boulevard. And it was designed to handle all of the stormwater from everywhere south of Providence Hospital through the Alzheimer's clinic. And was told that I couldn't do it after I'd already paid to put it in and put one property on it. I did the same with the Oak Meadows 2 subdivision. I put a stormwater plant in there and it doesn't work. So it's money wasted and effort, and it reduces the amount of affordable housing that can come in.
Well, I do know on Oak Meadows, when we did the curbside swales, when they graded them, they graded the entrance higher than the outlet, so no water ever ran into it. So
No,
they never worked.
It did work, because I went back in and regraded it.
Well,
You came out.
I look at it every time I go by there. And
Well, there's nothing to look at now. It's not just that it was, the fact is that we do get a certain amount of atmospheric dust, and it does land on the street. It does get washed into the curbs, and eventually it comes up above the original inlet set, especially when you end up with grass thatch. So no, the system doesn't work any better than ODOT's system on Springbrook works.
All of this discussion makes me go back to the earlier comments where we changed the words from adopt to explore, and let the folks decide to explore becoming, I don't like the word independent for waters, but something you wouldn't have to explain for 15 minutes as a goal for our city. I think that's a good goal. It has to meet all the cost analysis stuff that you guys are describing and effectiveness things that you guys are describing. But if we just use the word explore instead of adopt, I can go with this.
The only adopt in there is in number 1. The rest of them is more general language, like you suggest. So, but
Yeah.
I know the people that have worked on that, and I use some of the policies they have. In fact, with Habitat, I spent a couple hours on the 5th Street to eliminate the $21,350 amount. And I drew it on 8.5 by 11, and it was a little unclear for the city, but city approval seems favorable as soon as I can draw it so they can understand it better at a larger scale. So there's a lot of these things can do. I think the basic problem though is I think the engineering department should be encouraging different options, because I drive around in town and I keep thinking, what are we doing to ourselves? And why aren't we building more houses and spending less money on concrete? And concrete's one of the worst environmental building materials that you can use. And so my other suggestions include having narrower streets.
Just a minute, let me interrupt you. Let's deal with number one and decide if we're going to pass on that or if we would like to make take Bill's suggestion and say, have the city look at that with the idea of, consider adopting or sections of it or the whole, but that it should be a, water retention on properties. And
Pete,
and I would-
Denise has her hand up, so to talk. So
it's really the council's goals. One of the council goals is based on the triple bottom line. So environment, money, people, right? But all those things have to weigh in because you can't, Doug, do you know, there's a contract term you use. It's like best and most affordable, or do you know what that is, Karen? It's like best and most. We used it on the mill property when we were contracting something with them. We had to sign off on something for them. And it was, yes, we want you to be environmental, but we understand there's cost limitations. So you can't have affordable housing and expensive this. So how do you find a way to balance it? But balance is the key, right? Always in the triple bottom line. And there's a way to word it, and I can't remember because I don't even know what day it is, but I know there's like a contract phrase that's like that.
we can look that up, Denise.
Has the city looked at the standards so far?
So Leonard, so what the template shows, it's a template, and it really, if you read through it, it talks about, you have to modify it and make it work for your city, and evaluate different things. There's a lot of what's in that manual that we already have in our standards. They may be slightly different, because of something that occurred at that stage in the game when we actually adopted those standards. But a lot of it, you can't just adopt that document as it sits. You have to modify it. There's a lot of, well, if the city wants to do this, or the jurisdiction wants to do this, then you want to go down these paths. If you want to do this, then you need to go down this. So it's not a document that you can just adopt as is, if that makes sense. And again, we have a lot of this information already in our standards. Certainly I am not going to try and say that our standards are perfect. They can always be changed, and they can always get better, and those types of things. But that's one thing that document, again, is not one that you can just adopt as is, if that makes sense. And then, another thing that we can bring back, and that's a generic we, whether that's myself or Brett or Doug, is we can, if it would be helpful for this group, we can bring back some of the things that we already have in our standards, how we got to where we are with the TMDL requirements and those types of things. We have a flow chart, and we already have stuff in our standards that says that we want people to use LIDA facilities first before they drop down to any other facilities. So there's some of that is already in there. Again, I'm not trying to say that they're perfect, and that they can't be made better, but maybe it would be helpful for this group for us to come back and show you what we already have and what we do. And then we can go from there on that piece of the puzzle, if the committee thinks that would be helpful.
Yeah, I would also add to that, Karen, and since I'm doing a bunch of other code work right now, when I was going back through it, for on-site development, we already allow paving bricks, pavers and so forth. So in the end, it comes up to the developer what they want to do. So we don't, I guess the issue is kind of come up that we don't allow it. It's like, no, actually we do. It becomes the developer's choice. Are they going to put down asphalt? Are they going to put down concrete? Are they going to put down paving bricks? And they have to run, kind of gets to Mike's issue of, they have to run that cost analysis about what is economical for them over the life of that drive aisle or that parking lot or whatever it may be.
Well, there's paver roads dating from what, 2000 or 4000 BC? You know, if you travel to Europe, you see that quite often. And the design life of pavements, what, 12 years before you have to do an overlay?
Yeah, one of the things that we are finding, or they have found with some of those paver roads, is that they're not very good for ADA for people in wheelchairs. It really rattles them around a lot when they're using those. So I won't say that you can't, but you have to be a little bit careful about how you're doing it to make sure that you're not causing more of a problem for folks that have mobility issues.
Yeah, and I addressed that on the Habitat Restore because we have a concrete sidewalk from this street sidewalk to the building entrance. And then I do ADA parking spaces are all concrete, so we don't use pavers for the ADA parking. So I understand those concerns, and that's an easy fix.
I mean, my question after Doug's comment is, with due respect for the developers, is it appropriate for the developers alone to make the decision based on their analysis that this or that surface should be used? I mean, we allow pavers, but they get to decide what they do. And I wonder if that's the only input that ought to be involved at that point.
That's the way it is now. The problem is we're not making any headway on changing our destructive practices on stormwater management. So first of all, people, it's just real easy to not fight anything and just do what the city says. And I see a real tendency to just add it to the cost of the house. So only the rich people can buy houses, and Habitat was in a prime example. I mean, we're designing a water quality facility for like $21,350. And now if you pay that over the loan, it's another $10,000 of interest. So the two families that live in that house got to pay off 30 grand for a water quality improvement that we used to do for free with a couple volunteers and some free plants. Can you see the difference there? You know, we need an advocate to do all of this. And if everybody keeps throwing up roadblocks, we're never going to make a dent in how we're going to solve the water quality problems. And I just have a professional goal to do all my projects that way, and they've been fairly successful. But, you know, I was on one project where we had the curbside swales, which apparently the city doesn't want to do anymore. And there was a city inspector there. And then I look at what the contractor was doing, and I thought, well, they aren't doing it right. So I mentioned it to the city inspector. I says, they're not really doing this right. And he looked at me like, who are you? Got in his city truck and drove away.
And can we all agree that getting less input of stormwater into our system, into our streams is a goal that the city should have, and that they should encourage and streamline the process by which to bring down the levels of water going into our streams as stormwater, or capturing water on the properties and letting it infiltrate there. And the other thing is that we have how many different kinds of soils in our city? Really not that many. And well, if you look at the soil map, there's really not that many different kinds of soils. Has there been just some studies that are done? I mean, can the city offer and say, look, this is what you need for, or is this what you do already? For this particular site, you're going to need, there's just a straight calculation on, impermeable surfaces, I would imagine. But what, given the soil type and the permeability of that soil, do you guys have some guidelines or something along those lines? So if, let's say, homeowners want to start doing some of these things, that they actually know they don't have to hire an engineer. Or if Mike has a big project, the city states, has it stated right there, you are on this type of soil, you have this much impermeable surface, you're going to have a bioswale or this amount of square footage at this depth to get the capture and retention of water on your property. Is there anything like that, or is every single project a one-off?
In our current standards for single family homes, there is a LIDA facility calculation sheet and details that go down that path. The issue comes up as infiltration testing, as do things fully infiltrate or not, and that requires a site-specific, preferably at the location of the facility, for those tests to be done. And what I've seen in working in different areas in the cities is even within similar soil types, infiltration tests in one area versus another can create very different results. So it does come down to site-specific, and even within a site, sometimes location-specific, to see what soil types you have at where the facility is going to be going, and at what depth the facility is going to release that water into the soil. So it's difficult to achieve. It's really one size fits all.
Okay. So it is basically all one-off. Every site has its own specificity, and
when you get to infiltration, that one definitely. Rain gardens, you can do pretty much, like I said, like Brett said, we have a form that you can fill out that's pretty easy and tells you what the size of that rain garden needs to be. And then there are standard drawings that is, if you follow those, the homeowner can do that themselves. There is no requirement for them to have an engineer for that type of facility.
The one requirement that they all have, and Leonard did talk about that, is an overflow. And that kind of addresses that. If the infiltration rate is not great, there is always an overflow for what happens. So the water is directed. It's known where the water is going to go when there is an overflow, and that it's not going to into someone's home, elements, making certain it's in an appropriate location.
Yeah.
Have you made water quality rain garden standards? I've gotten city approval to eliminate the fabric and the drain rock, and then that's also reduce amended soil from 18 inches down to 6 inches. Has that been promulgated to all the developers?
No, it has not yet.
Stage.
Any massive change we do to the design and construction standards, Leonard, has to go to the city council for their approval. So, engineer, we can approve one-offs as you're doing, but any wholesale changes to the design and construction standards goes through actually a public process. Last time I took the standards to the council, Denise might remember this, she was still on council when I did that, is the request that we go talk to developers and other engineers and make sure everybody was on board with the proposals before adoption, and that document goes to the council for their adoption.
Sounds great. Let's get started.
We're starting to work on it now.
Thank you.
Well, Mr. Chair, I might just remind the committee is we've spent 30 minutes on the first one.
I don't think we're going to reach any kind of consensus at this point in time. Does, how many more of these meetings? Would this be an old business again next meeting?
Yes.
Okay, well, then I would suggest that we table this and everyone has a chance to really look at it. And I want to remind everyone that we're making recommendations. And, we aren't making final decisions in any way, shape, or form. And so we need to keep that in mind as we look at these things. In number 2, allow the use of rain gardens and infiltration as a preferred stormwater disposal per the design procedure that was outlined in my slideshow presentation, which I did not see. But so this procedure has been approved by the city of Newburgh. And what I've just heard is that the city is already working on this, on rain garden standards within the city.
We are looking at some of the design standards and going through a process for clarity and looking at different items. Yes. And that's across the board throughout the design standards, not just stormwater is what we're looking at.
Okay. And so in this case, in old business next meeting, could you tell us a little bit about what you're doing, Brett?
Yeah, we can give an update of what we're looking at. That, and we'll probably, from what Carlos is saying there, is I'll take a snapshot out of the design standards of what we currently have. And certainly, I think I provided you some direction to where those are located on the website, but I'll pull out some specific pieces there that show what's currently in the standards.
Thank you.
That's more clear.
And then we could have a much better discussion about it. Leonard, are you okay with going past number 2 and coming back to it next meeting?
Yeah, I guess my goal here is to have the city take a look at this, and basically they adopted the Clean Water Services standards, and I think they were originally done in 2011, and I don't think we've changed ours for the last 10 years. And what I do on projects has changed a lot over the last 10 years. It's changed a lot over the last 5 years. These DEQ standards came out about a year ago. I mean, this is a constantly evolving standard of practice, and I just would like to see the city start to get on board. I communicate a lot with the cities, and it's like sending stuff into a black hole, stuff goes in and nothing comes out. And I'm happy to work with the city, and I'd like to encourage them to do things, but I don't have a clue what the city's doing. I just know on my projects, I propose stuff, and I've been fortunate that generally they get approved. And so my clients, when they're faced with a $10,000, $11,000 problem, they seem real happy when I bill them half that for that. So why isn't everybody doing that? Why do I walk around and I look at all the stuff we're doing and I think, gee, we could have put 2 more houses where this water quality facility is, and we could have put rain gardens in every yard because they got plenty of room. Why are we spending? I don't know what those big concrete ones do, like the one on Columbia. Is it $100,000, $50,000? I don't know. When it's $21,000 just for a duplex on a 50 by 100 foot lot, somewhere we've gone amok and we need to change things.
Well, number 3 kind of goes right along with what we've been talking about, and encourage on-site disposal of stormwater and only allow neighborhood facilities as a last resort based on a demonstrated inability to provide on-site storage and infiltration. And I take it that means the lot where the residence resides.
Sure.
Yep.
Well, you can have two houses share a rain garden, or, you know, there's a lot of extra land, just the way we do development.
Well, Brett, would you address any of your standards at this point in time that address these things? Would you bring those specifically?
Yeah, yeah, and I just wanted to voice, I guess our next meeting is actually next week related to the wastewater master plan. I may not be able to get everything assembled in time for the agenda that'll be going out tomorrow for that. So
when is that meeting next week?
That is on the 18th for the wastewater. And then we have one on the 25th for the stormwater master plan. So that would be the one I'd be looking at.
Could we revisit these on the 25th for the stormwater master plan?
Yep. And by then I can have the snippets out of the plan.
That would be great. Thank you. I am more than likely to miss the meeting on the 18th. I'll have just gotten out of surgery, so I probably wouldn't be here. Okay,
Can I interject?
Connie, yes. Sorry, Connie.
It's just, I feel like we're kind of going round and round with this every meeting, and it seems to me it's not. I certainly don't disagree with anything Leonard's saying at all, but I think the prescriptive notion of these recommendations is just not appropriate for a committee such as this. Whereas in principle recommendations seem to me the way to go. So if we could revisit the recommendations, especially in light of some information from council, from the city, so that, you know, we're not telling them how wide to make the driveway. You know, I think Leonard could probably give that information to, you know, his recommendations as part of the committee, but that we talk about in principle that on many of these points. And so if the wording could be altered to speak more in principle rather than being prescriptive, it seems to me that would be a better way forward.
See? Oh, I see your thumb up in the screen. Mike? Say? Mike? Turn on your mic.
Muted.
Okay, mic's on.
Thank you, Connie. Connie, I would have to agree with you on, there has to be some way that we make a recommendation that includes these things, but they as not being prescriptive, that they should be looked at in the context of developing standards for the city, and that these are some of the ideas that this committee has come up with. Does that sit well with anyone? Or, I mean, I'm talking about, I would like to pretty much table all of these to our last meeting and think about it a little more and come up with, you know, I don't have any problem making a recommendation on just about everything here. As far as looking at what the city standards are and streamlining those standards and making them very clear to developers, to homeowners, and then, you know, some ideas of, I always look at it from a homeowner's point of view, sometimes from the park and rec point of view, but, you know, actually knowing what you're getting into before you start a development, or before you start a home, or before you start a rain garden, and that be very clear from the city what those, you know, those things are site specific. If you even have like, you know, if your perk test comes out this, you know, that means that you have to do this to your water capture system. You know, engineers are paid to do that, I think, once one is calculated for a certain perk test, I think it would work for all the ones that had the same perk test. Does that make sense?
It seems, and it seems to me too, there's something that we haven't considered at all, which is that well, on my limited experience, it doesn't rain very much in the summer here. And so there's a big concern about getting rid of all the water in the winter, and then during the summer, everyone lets their lawns go brown because they can't, don't feel like they can afford to pay for the water to water them. So, there's, I guess, that step too, but the rainwater capture, I guess, is issue is a bit broader than just rain gardens, is what I'm saying. And so perhaps incorporate something along the lines of how water can be, utilized on site as much as possible.
Mike Googler has his hand up.
Mike, just a minute though. Bill, I think your mic is on. We're getting feedback. I'm not sure that it is, but I think it is. Thank you. Bill, when your mic is on, we do get feedback out of your microphone. There, you're off.
Pete, basically, I agree. I have no problem making a recommendation, even not having read it. The only thing I would suggest is that when we make recommendations on what's done regarding rain gardens and swales and such, is that we also make recommendations on how they can be maintained. I can't think of anything more entertaining than having people try to share a rain garden, because somebody's going to be complaining they're not doing their share of maintenance. It's like sharing a water well.
The city has a policy requiring maintenance agreements, but they stopped requiring them 2 or 3 years ago, and they never go back and look at the ones they have to make sure the people are doing it. So basically, the city's been ignoring the agreements, and
We do require everybody to do the agreements, and we aren't ignoring them. We just don't have the manpower to go out and re-inspect to make sure that everybody is doing what those agreements are. Now, we will have to do that at some point in time, and we recognize that. But that does take manpower in order to make that happen. So, but we do require it now, today, for private stormwater facilities.
You know, when you're talking about, excuse me, but when you're talking about doing it for residential, it works really well for the first homeowner. But go 10 property changes down the road and find out how much people still remember or still want to adhere to those maintenance standards. If this is really important to the city, then the city needs to tax everybody in the city and use those monies for uniforms, to hire guards to go by and make sure that everybody's complying with their rules. I mean, it's the only way it's going to happen.
I was going to recommend that you and Leonard volunteer to be the rain garden police, and
I was going to have Connie do it.
Just depends on the uniform, really.
Well,
Connie can intimidate them by talking like an Aussie, and they just try to figure out who the hell is she. She's not from Newburgh.
Well, that's Mike brings up a good point. We talked about this before, in that, you know, if we think it's important, and if the city thinks it's important, they're going to have to redistribute some funding in order to make that happen. And, you know, if you have a lack of manpower, I know it's always, I mean, every organization, a lack of manpower, but, you know, looking at staffing and seeing, you know, there's a whole series of things that we could recommend here. And
Well,
in next meeting, I would like all of us to, not this next meeting, but the last stormwater meeting, I would like all of us to come with to email our lists into Brett beforehand, and he will put them on there. And then it would really streamline this process if we all knew what we were thinking. And then, and maybe even start with Leonard's here. And we would, and add on to that, and people could kind of, make up their minds a little bit beforehand, bit of a discussion, but keep in mind that these are all recommendations that we are asking this, we're recommending the city go in a specific direction. Now, what they decide is up to the city council.
Pete, if I could
Is that
also
fair enough to
recommend,
everyone?
if I
Yes.
could also recommend that everybody think about, when they're thinking about it, think about, are you thinking about new development, existing homeowners, or both? When you think about what you want to look forward to, does that make sense? Just because there's a difference in a lot of cases. So just think about that as you're putting your list together.
And Brett, you are going to send out, a good week beforehand information about
Yes.
current standards. Could you
Yes, so
include, since part of this is about streets and pavers and things like that, could you include the standards on those?
I'll send some snippets of the street width standards out of the code. Yeah,
Okay.
I'll grab some things to put together for that. That'd be the meeting on the 25th. So if,
Yeah.
if you're going to email me that list of recommendations from the individual members, if I could have that by the 16th, 17th would be ideal, to be able to get that into the agenda on the 18th. Make certain that they're
Well,
before then.
it'd be the meeting on the 25th, right?
Yeah, but where he's going at is you need to get your questions and your ideas to Brett enough so that he has time to compile it and do any research, so that a report goes out on the 18th in order for your 25th meeting. So if we get something on the 18th, he's not going to have time to do his research to include it in the packet that day.
I thought you and he would burn the midnight oil and just stay up all night and get that done.
Oh, we're already doing that, and
We're doing that.
Okay.
is that what you're doing tonight?
that's what we're doing tonight, Mike.
Yeah.
Also, Newburgh helped write the neighborhood street guidelines that was adopted by the city of Oregon. In fact, the fire chief of Newburgh is one of the listed people on the credits of who did it. All we need to do is follow our own recommendations on street width. So I recommend that you look at that again after we wrote it. You can just Google neighborhood street guidelines on the internet and it'll pop right up.
Pete, you're muted.
Yeah, Brett, could you send a link included in that list, the link to that, please? What he just talked about.
And Leonard has sent a number of emails and a number of documents there. I'll look to compile those and resend.
Thank you.
Is there any other discussion then on this old business? Does anyone have any discussion?
Thank you.
Yep. I think that will be much more efficient at handling this. And so everyone, a reminder into Brett, your ideas for recommendations on stormwater by the 16th or 17th, he said.
Yep.
Okay.
And
Go ahead, Brett.
Oh, go ahead. No, continue.
Is there there's no one from the public here that I see so do we have any public comments that came into the city?
No, I had not received any public comments.
Okay. Any items from the staff?
Yeah, I just one item just talking about with schedule and things. I wanted to thank everyone for, we've had to add some additional meetings into the schedule to deal with just kind of some issues that have come up and working through all the master plans. Looking to all these technical updates all happen concurrently, led to some conflicts with schedules. So we've had to add some meetings, and I wanted to share that there will be 2 more meetings on the stormwater. One will be on the 25th of March, or excuse me, the 25th of February. And then the final meeting for this committee will be the 25th of March with the full stormwater. And that's the full update on that plan.
Thank you.
Well, if items from the staff,
That's
Besides
the, I
Brett,
don't have any
Doug,
other
you got
items.
anything? Karen? No? Well, then this meeting is over. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Cute.
Thanks, Pete.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.